Now, if you think the Galactic Empire had a twisted sense of entertainment, you'd be absolutely right. The Nexari Empire, in all their chrome-plated, self-congratulatory glory, had turned blood sport into high art. They had arena complexes the size of small moons, betting systems that could calculate odds on a fighter's breakfast choices, and crowds that screamed for violence with the same enthusiasm most species reserved for, well, literally anything else. But here's the thing about humans. We've always been the galaxy's favorite underdog story, even when we didn't know we were auditioning for the role. The colony ship New Haven was having what you might generously call a bad day. What started as a routine supply run to the outer rim had turned into a cosmic game of cat and mouse, except the cat was a Nexari battlecruiser the size of a city block, and the mouse was, unfortunately, them. 16-year-old Hazel pressed her face against the viewport, watching as sleek Nexari fighters swarmed around their ship like metallic wasps. Her twin brother Noah stood beside her, his jaw set in that stubborn way that meant he was about to do something either very brave or very stupid. Knowing Noah, probably both. "Well," Hazel said, her voice carrying that particular brand of dry humor that had gotten her in trouble since she could talk. "This is going exactly as well as I expected our family vacation to go." "It's not a vacation, Hazel," Noah replied, though his lips twitched toward a smile despite their circumstances. "It's a supply run. Same difference. We leave home, things go sideways, someone ends up captured by aliens." She shrugged, as if this were a perfectly normal Tuesday occurrence. "At least we're consistent." Their friend Valentina looked up from the tactical display she'd been studying with the intense focus of someone who definitely wasn't supposed to have access to it. At 15, she had the unfortunate combination of brilliant analytical mind and absolutely zero respect for authority, a combination that had made her both invaluable and insufferable to the colony's leadership. "Actually," Valentina said, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface, "this is significantly worse than I initially calculated. The Nexari aren't just capturing us, they're scanning us. Biological scans, neural pattern analysis, combat potential assessments." "Combat potential?" Noah raised an eyebrow. "I can barely manage combat with my own shoelaces." "That's not what their sensors are reading," Valentina said grimly. "Apparently, humans register as unusually resilient and adaptively aggressive on their threat assessment matrix." Hazel snorted. "Adaptively aggressive? Have they met Noah? The boy apologizes to furniture when he bumps into it." The ship shuddered as the Nexari tractor beam locked onto them with all the gentleness of a freight train hitting a butterfly. Through the viewport, the massive battlecruiser loomed larger, its hull gleaming with weapons arrays that could probably vaporize small asteroids for fun. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom, steady despite the circumstances. "All passengers and crew, prepare for boarding. I repeat, prepare for boarding. Remember, we are civilians on a legitimate supply mission." "Right," Hazel muttered, "because that's definitely going to matter to the species that thinks gladiatorial combat is evening entertainment." The boarding process was, to put it mildly, not gentle. Nexari soldiers moved through the ship with the efficiency of people who'd done this far too many times. They were tall, angular beings with skin that looked like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed with a cold blue light. Their armor was sleek, functional, and covered in enough weapons to level a small building. The soldier examining the three teenagers tilted his head with what might have been curiosity. He spoke into a translation device, and his words emerged in crisp, accented English. "These are juveniles?" "Yes," Captain Morrison said firmly, stepping protectively in front of the kids. "They're children." Under galactic law. Galactic law recognizes the right of conquest, the soldier interrupted. Your species' youth are of particular interest to our entertainment division. Valentina's eyes narrowed. Entertainment division? The soldier's mouth curved in what was probably meant to be a smile, but looked more like a knife blade. Young specimens often provide more interesting performances in the juvenile arenas, less tactical knowledge, more raw survival instinct. Juvenile arenas, Noah repeated slowly. That sounds ominous. It should, the soldier replied. Your species has quite the reputation for spectacular failures. Now, here's where things got interesting. Most species, when faced with capture by a militaristic empire known for feeding people to various forms of exotic death, would probably be crying, begging, or at the very least looking appropriately terrified. Hazel, on the other hand, laughed. Not a nervous giggle or a hysterical breakdown, a genuine amused laugh that echoed through the cargo hold like she'd just heard the galaxy's best joke. "Oh, this is rich," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "You capture a supply ship full of colonists, separate the kids, and your master plan is to throw us into some kind of alien gladiator pit for entertainment." The Nexari soldier's glowing eyes flickered with what might have been confusion. "You find your impending doom amusing?" "Impending doom?" Hazel grinned. "Buddy, you haven't met humans, have you? We're the species that looked at the concept of certain death and turned it into a hobby." Valentina caught on to what Hazel was doing and stepped forward with her most innocent smile, which, coming from Valentina, was approximately as innocent as a tactical nuclear weapon. "Sir," she said sweetly, "just so we're clear on the rules here, you're planning to put human children in an arena and expect us to fight each other to the death for the entertainment of paying customers." "Correct." "And this is considered normal entertainment in your culture?" "The finest entertainment in the galaxy," the soldier said, with what was clearly pride. "Combat reveals the true nature of a species. Your kind has shown particular aptitude for savage desperation." Noah, who had been listening with growing horror, finally found his voice. "Previous humans fought in these arenas?" "Oh yes," the soldier said. "Adult specimens primarily. They provided excellent sport, brutal, cunning, willing to do anything to survive. Unfortunately, they never lasted more than a few matches. Your species lacks staying power." "Staying power," Hazel repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting assessment." The soldier gestured to his companions, and they began herding the colonists toward the docking bay. The adults were moved to one section, while Hazel, Noah, and Valentina were directed toward a separate transport. As they walked, Valentina leaned close to her friends. "Did you catch what he said about previous human fighters?" "Yeah," Noah whispered back. "They were adults, and they fought exactly the way the Nexari expected them to." "Brutal and cunning," Hazel added quietly. "In other words, they played right into the stereotype." The transport ship that would take them to the arena complex was luxurious in the way that expensive prisons often are. Comfortable enough to keep the merchandise in good condition, secure enough to prevent any unfortunate escapes. The three teenagers found themselves in a holding area with other juvenile fighters from various species, most of whom looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else in the universe. A young Kethmori, a species that looked like someone had crossed a lizard with a very elegant tree, huddled in the corner, its scales shifting through colors that probably indicated terror. Near the viewport, a Solari youth sat perfectly still, its crystalline features reflecting the starlight in patterns that suggested deep meditation or complete catatonic breakdown. "Well," Hazel announced to the room in general. "This is cozy. Anyone know what the survival rate is for these gladiator games?" The Kethmori's scales shifted to what was definitely the color of panic. Survival rate? You know, how many contestants typically walk away from these things? Walk away? A new voice joined the conversation. A Vrex youngster, bipedal, furry, with large eyes that had seen far too much, looked up from where it had been trying to make itself as small as possible. Nobody walks away. That's the point. Valentina sat down across from the Vrex. "What's your name?" "Does it matter?" the creature replied. "We'll all be dead in a few days anyway." "It matters to me," Valentina said firmly. "I'm Valentina. These are my friends, Hazel and Noah." The Vrex hesitated. "Quintal." "Nice to meet you, Quintal. Now, tell me, how exactly do these arena matches work?" Noah shot her a look. "Val, maybe now isn't the time for tactical planning." "Now is exactly the time for tactical planning," she replied. "Quintal?" The young Varex's ears drooped. "They put groups of juveniles in the arena together, usually 6 to 10 fighters. You're given basic weapons, swords, staffs, sometimes projectile weapons if they're feeling generous. The rules are simple. Fight until only one remains alive. And the winner gets better food, medical treatment, and lives to fight again the following week." Hazel leaned back against the wall. "So, it's not really about winning. It's about putting on a good show until you eventually lose." "The crowds bet on everything," Quintal continued miserably. "How long you'll last, what kind of wounds you'll receive, whether you'll beg for mercy before you die." "Charming," Noah muttered. The transport ship's engines hummed as they approached their destination. Through the viewports, the arena complex came into view, and it was, well, calling it impressive would be like calling a supernova a bit bright. The structure was massive, a gleaming disk of metal and energy shields that could have housed a small city. Docking bays dotted its surface like glowing caves, and the entire thing rotated slowly, probably for dramatic effect more than any practical purpose. "The Nexari Grand Arena," Quintal said quietly, "home to the most popular gladiatorial games in the galaxy. On fight days, it holds over 200,000 spectators, with billions more watching the broadcasts." Valentina's eyes sharpened. "Broadcasts?" "Oh yes. The games are transmitted to 400 planets across the Nexari Empire. It's the most watched entertainment in known space." Hazel and Noah exchanged a look. They'd both caught the same thing Valentina had. This wasn't just about surviving some alien blood sport. This was about performing for an audience of billions. As their transport settled into a docking bay, armed guards waited to escort them to their new accommodations. The docking bay alone was larger than most buildings back home, filled with other ships bringing fighters, officials, and spectators from across the galaxy. "Well," Hazel said, as they were led toward what were undoubtedly their cells, "at least we're not going to die in obscurity." "That's your takeaway from this situation?" Noah asked. "Noah, my dear brother, when life hands you a galactic audience and a gladiatorial arena, you don't waste the opportunity." "Opportunity? For what?" Hazel's grin was sharp enough to cut glass. "To give them a show they'll never forget." The guards processed them through a series of checkpoints, each more elaborate than the last. Medical scans, psychological evaluations, combat potential assessments, and finally, the assignment of their arena identification numbers. Human specimens 1141, 1142, and 1143, the processing officer announced in a bored tone. Scheduled for Juvenile Combat Arena 6, Rotation Cycle 4. Next match in 3 days. 3 days to prepare for what was essentially a death sentence, delivered with all the enthusiasm of someone announcing the cafeteria menu. As they were led to their holding cells, Hazel caught sight of a massive display screen showing highlights from previous matches. Adult humans, just as the soldier had said, fighting with desperate savagery. They were fast, clever, and absolutely ruthless, and they were all dead. "Val," she whispered as they walked, "I see it. They expect us to be like them." "Brutal and cunning," Noah added quietly. Valentina nodded slowly, "which means they have absolutely no idea what they're actually dealing with." The holding cells were, well, they were cells. Clean, functional, and designed to house fighters in reasonable comfort, until it was time for them to die for the entertainment of others. Each cell had a sleeping area, basic facilities, and a small training space equipped with practice weapons. The 3 humans were placed in adjacent cells, close enough to talk but separated by energy barriers that hummed with barely contained power. Around them, other juvenile fighters sat in their own cells, most staring at nothing with the blank expression of people who'd already given up. "So," Hazel said, settling onto her sleeping pad with the casual air of someone checking into a hotel, "anyone have any bright ideas about how to handle our upcoming gladiatorial debut?" Noah tested the energy barrier with a careful finger and promptly jerked his hand back as it delivered a mild shock. "Well, fighting each other is obviously off the table." "Obviously," Valentina agreed. "The question is, what do we do instead?" "We could refuse to fight," Noah suggested. "Just sit down and let whatever happens happen." Hazel considered this. "That's either the most brilliant or the most suicidal plan I've ever heard." "Why not both?" From the next cell over, Quintal's voice drifted through the barrier. "Are you 3 seriously planning to just not fight?" "That's the idea," Valentina replied. "They'll kill you." "They're going to kill us anyway," Hazel pointed out. "At least this way, we go out on our own terms. But the audience, they expect violence. They want to see combat." Noah leaned against the barrier separating them from Quintal. "Then maybe it's time they saw something different." The young Vrex was quiet for a long moment. "You're insane." "Probably," Hazel agreed cheerfully. "But we're insane humans, which historically has been a very dangerous combination for anyone trying to predict our behavior." Outside their cells, the arena complex hummed with activity. Maintenance crews prepared the fighting surfaces, betting syndicates calculated odds, and somewhere high above them, General Vexmar reviewed the upcoming match roster with the satisfaction of someone who'd just acquired 3 new toys to break. The next morning, if you could call it morning in a space station that never saw actual sunlight, brought with it the kind of breakfast that suggested the Nexari had put about as much thought into prisoner nutrition as they had into prisoner rights, which is to say, none whatsoever. "Well," Hazel announced, poking at what might generously be called protein paste, with a utensil that was definitely not sharp enough to be used as a weapon, "I've had worse." "When?" Noah asked, genuinely curious. "Remember when Mom tried to make that health food casserole with the kelp substitute?" "Oh, right. This is definitely better than the kelp thing." Valentina, meanwhile, had discovered that their breakfast trays came with small data chips, apparently containing nutritional information, training schedules, and what the arena management cheerfully referred to as contestant survival guidelines. She'd managed to access the chips using a trick involving the cell's entertainment system that was definitely not supposed to work. "Interesting," she murmured, scrolling through data streams that painted a rather grim picture of their immediate future. Define interesting, Hazel said, abandoning her breakfast to peer over Valentina's shoulder. According to these files, the average survival time for juvenile fighters is approximately 18 minutes. Adult fighters do better. Some last as long as an hour. An hour? Noah set down his spoon. That's the success story? Gets better. Human fighters, both adult and juvenile, have the worst survival statistics of any species in the arena's database. Quintal's voice drifted from the neighboring cell, tinged with morbid curiosity. How bad? The longest any human has ever lasted in the arena was 36 minutes. That was an adult male who apparently had military training. And juveniles? Valentina's expression grew grimmer. The record is 14 minutes. A heavy silence settled over their section of the holding area. Around them, other young fighters absorbed this information with the enthusiasm typically reserved for terminal diagnoses. Well, Hazel said finally, at least we know what we're up against. Mass extinction? Noah suggested. Low expectations, Hazel corrected, which, historically speaking, has been humanity's secret weapon. Their philosophical discussion was interrupted by the arrival of arena staff, a collection of various species who had the cheerful demeanor of people whose job security depended on other people dying entertainingly. The lead official, a tall, spindly being with too many joints and eyes that never blinked, consulted a holographic clipboard. Contestants 1141, 1142, and 1143. It announced in a voice like grinding metal, "Report for preliminary combat assessment." The assessment area was a large, circular chamber, with weapons racks lining the walls and training dummies scattered across the floor. Other juvenile fighters were already there, being evaluated by trainers who looked like they'd rather be literally anywhere else. The human trio was directed to a corner where a Nexari trainer waited with the patient expression of someone who'd seen this particular tragedy play out many times before. "I am Instructor Veltar," the trainer said, his translation device rendering his words in a tone that suggested professional boredom. "I will be conducting your combat readiness evaluation." "Combat readiness," Hazel repeated. "Right. Just so we're all clear on the parameters here, you're evaluating how ready we are to murder each other for the entertainment of paying customers." Veltar's expression didn't change. "Correct. And this is your job, like your actual career." "I have been training gladiators for over 2 decades." "Wow!" Hazel looked genuinely impressed. "That's actually kind of horrifying when you think about it." Veltar gestured to the weapons rack. "Select your preferred combat implements." The 3 teenagers approached the rack with varying degrees of enthusiasm, which is to say, Noah looked like he was approaching a rack of venomous snakes. Valentina examined the weapons with clinical interest, and Hazel picked up a sword and immediately started using it as a mirror to check her reflection. "This is a ceremonial blade from the Korthak system," Veltar explained, taking the sword from Hazel and demonstrating proper grip technique. "Lightweight, well-balanced, designed for quick strikes rather than heavy combat." "Uh-huh," Hazel said, not paying attention. "Question: do you guys have any non-lethal weapons? Like maybe something designed to incapacitate rather than, murder?" Veltar stared at her. "Non-lethal weapons?" "Yeah, stun batons, neural disruptors, something that would let us put on a good show without actually killing anyone. The point of gladiatorial combat is death." "Right, but what if the point was something else? Like, what if the point was entertainment that didn't require anyone to actually die?" The trainer's confusion was visible even across species lines. But then it would not be gladiatorial combat. It would be something better, Noah said quietly, picking up a staff and testing its weight. It would be sport. Veltar looked between the three humans with the expression of someone trying to solve a particularly complex mathematical equation. You do not wish to fight? Oh, we'll fight, Valentina said, selecting a pair of curved blades that looked like they'd been designed by someone with a very dramatic sense of aesthetics. Just not each other. Then who will you fight? The system, Hazel replied cheerfully. The combat assessment proceeded about as well as you'd expect. Noah demonstrated that he could hold a weapon without dropping it, which apparently exceeded expectations for human juveniles. Valentina showed a natural aptitude for defensive techniques that impressed even the bored trainer. And Hazel? Well, Hazel treated the entire thing like an elaborate joke, which seemed to confuse everyone except her friends. Contestant 1141, Veltar said, consulting his notes, you appear to lack any survival instinct whatsoever. Oh, I have plenty of survival instinct, Hazel replied, sitting down on the training mat with her legs crossed. I'm just not planning to survive the way you expect. Explain. Well, see, you're expecting us to fight each other because that's what humans do, right? We're savage, desperate, willing to do anything to live another day. Previous human contestants have demonstrated these characteristics, yes. Right. But here's the thing. Those were adults. Adults who had already been broken by whatever circumstances led them here. Adults who had families to get back to, responsibilities, reasons to desperately cling to life. Veltar leaned forward with what might have been interest. And you do not? Oh, we do, Noah said, understanding where Hazel was going with this. But we also have something those adults didn't have. Which is? Each other, Valentina finished. And the absolute certainty that we're not going to abandon each other just to buy ourselves a few more days of captivity. The trainer was quiet for a long moment. You would choose death over victory? We would choose dignity over survival, Hazel corrected, which, statistically speaking, amounts to the same thing in your arena system. After the combat assessment came the medical evaluation, which was thorough, invasive, and conducted with all the warmth of a livestock inspection. The medical staff seemed particularly interested in human physiology, taking tissue samples and conducting scans that mapped everything from bone density to neural pathways. Fascinating, the lead medical officer murmured, reviewing their scan results. Human juveniles show remarkably high stress tolerance. Pain thresholds are well above average. Adrenaline production systems are quite robust. Great, Noah muttered. We're built to suffer entertainingly. More interestingly, the officer continued, your species shows unusual neural connectivity in regions associated with social bonding and cooperative behavior. Most gladiator species show heightened individual survival responses, but humans display strong pack loyalty even under extreme stress. Valentina perked up. Pack loyalty? Your scans indicate that your primary stress responses are focused not on individual survival, but on group protection. Quite unusual. Unusual how? Most species, when faced with mortal danger, prioritize self-preservation. Your brains are wired to prioritize the survival of your social group, even at personal cost. The three friends exchanged glances. Their plan was starting to look less like noble stupidity and more like biological inevitability. The final part of their preparation was what the arena staff called crowd psychology briefing, essentially a crash course in how to die in a way that would keep the audience entertained. The briefing room was filled with holographic displays showing highlights from previous matches, accompanied by audience reaction data, betting statistics, and what could only be described as a death highlight reel. "The audience comes to see combat," explained the briefing officer, a being that looked like someone had crossed a corporate executive with a very polite shark. "They want to see courage, desperation, cunning, and ultimately, spectacular failure." "Spectacular failure," Hazel repeated. "That's what we're aiming for?" "Failure is inevitable. The question is whether your failure will be memorable." The display showed a compilation of memorable failures, fighters who had died in particularly dramatic or unexpected ways. There was the Zephyrian, who had tried to surrender and been torn apart by his own teammate. The Korthak warrior, who had fought so valiantly that the crowd had actually cheered when he finally fell. The Solari Crystalmancer, who had used his last moments to create a light display that had brought tears to beings who didn't technically have tear ducts. "Each of these fighters is remembered," the officer continued. "Their deaths became part of arena legend. They achieved a form of immortality through their final moments." "Immortality through entertaining death," Noah said. "That's the best-case scenario here?" "For most species, yes." Valentina raised her hand. "Question. Has anyone ever achieved immortality through refusing to die entertainingly?" The officer's expression suggested this was not a question anyone had asked before. "Refusing to die entertainingly?" "You know, dying in a boring way. Or better yet, not dying at all." "Not dying at all is not an option in gladiatorial combat." "Right, but what if it was? Then it would not be gladiatorial combat?" "Exactly," Hazel said with satisfaction. "It would be something unprecedented." That evening, as the arena complex settled into its nocturnal rhythm, the three friends huddled as close to their cell barriers as they could manage, speaking in whispers about their plan. "So, we're really doing this?" Noah asked. "We're really going to walk into that arena and just not fight?" "We're going to do something better than not fight," Valentina said. "We're going to show them what humans actually are, instead of what they expect us to be. Which is cooperative, loyal, stubborn as hell when it comes to protecting the people we care about." Hazel nodded. "Plus, we're going to do it in front of 400 billion viewers across the galaxy. If we're going to make a statement about humanity, we might as well make it to the biggest possible audience." From the neighboring cells, they could hear other fighters preparing for the upcoming matches in their own ways. Some were praying to whatever deities their species revered. Others were practicing combat forms, the sounds of their movements echoing through the holding area. A few were simply sitting in silent contemplation of their approaching mortality. "Hey," Quintal's voice drifted through the barriers. "Are you three really planning to just sit down in the arena tomorrow?" "That's the plan," Hazel confirmed. "They'll send in the punishment beasts, creatures designed to force fighters into combat. Then we'll deal with the beasts. Without fighting each other. Without fighting each other." Quintal was quiet for a moment. "You know, there's a small possibility that you three are either the bravest individuals I've ever met or the most insane." "Why not both?" Noah suggested. "Because brave and insane don't usually survive first contact with reality." Valentina leaned closer to the barrier. "Quintal, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you look at your life, really look at it, are you proud of who you've become?" The young Rex was silent for so long that they thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally his voice came through the barrier, small and sad. "I used to be." "Then, maybe," Hazel said gently, "it's time to remember who that person was." The night passed slowly. Around them, The arena complex hummed with preparation for the next day's entertainment. Somewhere far above, General Vexmar reviewed the betting pools and spectator forecasts with satisfaction. The human juveniles had generated significant interest, mostly in the form of bets on how quickly they would die, but interest nonetheless. In their cells, Hazel, Noah, and Valentina spent their final night before the arena doing what humans have always done when facing impossible odds. They talked. They shared memories of home, told jokes that weren't particularly funny but made them laugh anyway, and reminded each other of all the reasons why some things were more important than mere survival. "Tomorrow," Valentina said, as the artificial dawn began to brighten their cells, "we show the galaxy what humans are really made of." "Stubbornness and terrible decision-making skills," Noah suggested. "Love," Hazel corrected. "We're made of love. Everything else is just details." The arena staff would arrive soon to begin their final preparations. The crowd would gather, the bets would be placed, and 3 human teenagers would walk into an arena designed for death with absolutely no intention of giving the audience what they expected. It was, by any reasonable measure, either the most heroic or the most foolish thing anyone had ever attempted. Which, as Hazel had pointed out, was exactly the kind of thing humans were famous for. Arena Day arrived with all the fanfare of a galactic spectacle and the subtle dread of a public execution. The complex buzzed with 200,000 spectators from across the Nexari Empire, their voices creating a symphony of anticipation that could probably be heard from orbit. The holding area beneath the arena floor had transformed overnight into a staging ground for what the announcer kept calling glorious combat. Other juvenile fighters were led away in groups, their footsteps echoing through corridors that had seen far too much of this particular brand of entertainment. When the guards arrived for Hazel, Noah, and Valentina, they found 3 teenagers sitting calmly in meditation poses, breathing steadily as if they were preparing for a particularly challenging math exam rather than mortal combat. Contestants 1141, 1142, and 1143, the lead guard announced. "It is time." "Excellent timing," Hazel replied, standing and stretching like she'd just woken up from a pleasant nap. "I was getting bored." The walk to the arena entrance felt both eternal and instantaneous. Corridors lined with weapons, medical stations, and what were definitely body disposal chutes led them steadily upward toward the sound of a crowd that had come to watch children die. At the final checkpoint, Instructor Veltar waited with their assigned weapons and what might charitably be called encouragement. "Remember," he said, handing Noah a curved sword that gleamed under the harsh lights, "the crowd respects courage above all else. Fight with honor, and your deaths will be remembered." "Thanks for the pep talk," Hazel said, accepting her own blade with the casual air of someone being handed a dinner menu. Really inspiring stuff. The arena entrance was a massive archway that opened onto the fighting floor like the mouth of some enormous beast. Beyond it, the roar of the crowd was deafening. 200,000 beings cheering for blood, with the enthusiasm of sports fans everywhere. Valentina paused at the threshold. "Last chance to reconsider this plan." "Are you reconsidering?" Noah asked, not even slightly. "Then let's go teach the galaxy something new." They stepped into the arena together, and the crowd's roar intensified. The arena floor was a circle of polished stone approximately 50 meters across, surrounded by towering walls that rose to seats packed with spectators. Above them, massive display screens showed their faces and statistics to the audience. "Ladies, gentlemen, and beings of all classifications," the announcer's voice boomed across the arena, "presenting today's Juvenile Combat Showcase." featuring 3 specimens of the notorious human species. The crowd's enthusiasm was palpable. Betting information scrolled across the displays. Current odds had them lasting less than 10 minutes, with side bets on which one would break first. The humans have shown exceptional savagery in previous arena appearances, the announcer continued, and today's contestants are expected to provide the same brutal entertainment. Hazel looked up at the massive audience, then at the weapons in their hands, then at her friends. She walked to the center of the arena, set her sword down carefully on the stone floor, and sat down cross-legged beside it. Noah and Valentina followed suit. The crowd's roar gradually faded to confused murmurs as the 3 humans simply sat in the center of the arena, making no move toward the weapons or each other. "Well," Hazel said conversationally, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet, "this is nice. How's everyone doing today?" "Pretty good," Noah replied, settling into a comfortable position. Bit nervous about the whole being murdered for entertainment thing, but otherwise can't complain. "That's the spirit," Valentina added. "Personally, I'm wondering if they serve snacks at these things. All this sitting around is making me hungry." The crowd's confusion was becoming audible. Beings who had come to see blood and combat were instead watching 3 teenagers have a casual conversation while ignoring perfectly good weapons lying within arm's reach. The announcer said, clearly not working from a script for this particular scenario. "The contestants appear to be talking?" "Oh, we're definitely talking," Hazel called up to the announcer's booth. "Would you like to join the conversation? We were just discussing the philosophical implications of entertainment that requires actual death versus entertainment that, doesn't." Arena officials were scrambling. Through the arena's communication systems, they could hear frantic discussions about protocol, precedent, and what exactly one was supposed to do when gladiators refused to be gladiatorial. "This is unprecedented," General Vexmar's voice carried across the arena's internal channels, audible to anyone with the right equipment, which, thanks to Valentina's earlier hacking, included the humans themselves. "Should we send in the motivation beasts?" came a technician's voice. "The what now?" Noah asked, looking genuinely interested. His question was answered when a section of the arena floor slid away, revealing a holding pen containing what could only be described as the galaxy's most unpleasant wildlife preservation project. 3 creatures emerged: lean, hungry-looking predators with too many teeth and the single-minded focus of beings who viewed everything else as potential dinner. The crowd perked up. This was more like it. The beasts circled the sitting humans with predatory intent, growling and snapping as they tested for weakness. Most fighters would have scrambled for weapons, begun defending themselves, started the violent spectacle everyone expected. Instead, Hazel began singing. It was an old Earth song, something about sunshine and hope, delivered in a clear, sweet voice that somehow carried over the growing sounds of predatory hunger. Noah joined in on the harmony, and Valentina added a percussion element by tapping her fingers against her knees. The crowd fell silent. Here were 3 human children, surrounded by designed killers, singing a lullaby while certain death circled them like sharks. When the beasts finally lunged, the humans moved, not to fight each other, but to protect each other. They formed a tight circle, back to back, using their weapons not as tools of mutual destruction, but as shields against external threats. They fought, the key. Beasts with coordination that spoke of years of friendship, covering each other's weaknesses and amplifying each other's strengths. When Hazel stumbled, Noah was there to steady her. When Valentina's blade caught in one creature's hide, Hazel was there to guard her back. And when the last beast fell, they didn't turn on each other. They sat back down. Now that was refreshing, Hazel announced, slightly out of breath but grinning. Anyone else hungry? I could really go for some of that protein paste about now. 200,000 spectators sat in absolute silence, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The display screens showed confused betting officials frantically trying to calculate odds for a scenario that had literally never occurred in the arena's history. "So," Noah said, picking up his conversation as if they hadn't just been fighting for their lives, "what were we talking about before the interruption?" "I believe," Valentina replied, examining her blade for damage, "we were discussing the philosophical implications of entertainment systems that require actual death." "Right. Where did we land on that?" "I think we decided it was stupid." "Stupid seems harsh," Noah said thoughtfully. "Maybe just unnecessarily limited in scope?" The crowd remained silent, hanging on every word of this impossible conversation. What happened next was something that media analysts would study for generations, sociologists would write dissertations about, and arena executives would have nightmares over for the rest of their unnatural lives. The silence stretched across the arena like a living thing. 200,000 beings collectively holding their breath as they tried to process what they'd just witnessed. Then, from somewhere in the upper sections, a young Kethmori stood up and began what could only be described as the slowest, most profound clap in galactic history. It spread. Row by row, section by section, beings across the arena began to applaud. Not the bloodthirsty cheering they'd arrived with, but something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, or shame, or maybe just the simple acknowledgement that they'd witnessed something that shouldn't have been possible. "Well," Hazel said, looking up at the crowd with mild surprise, "that's not what I expected." The arena's broadcast systems were working overtime, transmitting the unprecedented scene to 400 billion viewers across the galaxy. In living rooms, bars, and public spaces throughout Nexari space, beings watched 3 human children refuse to participate in their own destruction. Social media networks crashed as beings across dozens of species began asking uncomfortable questions. Why had they accepted gladiatorial combat as entertainment? When had watching children die become normal? What did it say about their civilization that cooperation and loyalty were more shocking than violence? In the arena's control booth, General Vexmar watched his carefully orchestrated spectacle transform into something resembling a moral awakening. His communication channels were lighting up with urgent messages from planetary governors, military commanders, and very nervous entertainment executives. "Sir," his aide stammered, "the broadcast ratings are unlike anything in recorded history. Every inhabited system in the Empire is watching. And they're not watching for the usual reasons." Down in the arena, Valentina had noticed the shift in crowd energy. "I think we might have accidentally started something." "Started what?" Noah asked. "A revolution," Hazel said cheerfully. "Cool." The arena officials, meanwhile, were having what could charitably be called a complete breakdown of normal procedures. The rulebook, apparently quite extensive, had no provisions for contestants who simply refused to follow the fundamental premise of gladiatorial combat. "Options," General Vexmar demanded through the communication system. "We could declare them winners and remove them from the arena," came a hesitant voice. "That sets a precedent that any fighter can avoid combat by simply sitting down. We could send in more beasts and risk them continuing to cooperate instead of turning on each other. We could execute them directly." The crowd's mood had shifted enough that this suggestion was met with audible boos from several sections. Executing 3 unarmed teenagers in front of a galactic audience was apparently where even blood sport enthusiasts drew the line. On planets throughout the Empire, something unprecedented was happening. Young beings were walking out of arena viewing parties. Parents were turning off broadcasts and asking their children if they wanted to play games that didn't involve anyone dying. Military academies found themselves fielding questions about why honor and loyalty weren't considered more valuable than individual survival. The 3 humans, meanwhile, had moved on to discussing Noah's recipe for chocolate chip cookies, a conversation that was being broadcast to more beings than had ever simultaneously witnessed anything in galactic history. The trick, Noah was explaining, is not to overmix the dough. You want it just combined, otherwise the cookies get tough. Noted, Valentina said seriously. What about the chocolate chips? Even distribution? Even distribution is key. Hazel always tries to hoard them in one section. Hey, Hazel protested. Strategic chocolate placement is a legitimate baking technique. In the control booth, General Vexmar made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. End the broadcast. Sir, cut the feed. Now. But it was too late. The moment had been captured, recorded, and was already spreading through networks faster than the Empire's censors could contain it. Bootleg recordings appeared on underground channels. Independent journalists began investigating the arena system. Protest movements that had been quietly simmering for decades suddenly found their rallying cry. 3 months later, the Nexari Empire quietly announced the temporary suspension of gladiatorial combat pending cultural review. 6 months after that, the practice was banned entirely, replaced with competitive sporting events that managed to provide excitement without requiring actual death. General Vexmar was reassigned to a logistics position on a mining station in the Outer Rim, where he spent his remaining years wondering how 3 human children had managed to dismantle an entertainment industry that had lasted for millennia simply by refusing to participate in it. The humans themselves were quietly released along with their fellow colonists, who had spent the intervening time in considerably more comfortable accommodations once it became clear that executing the families of galactic heroes would be politically problematic. When they finally made it home to their colony, Hazel, Noah, and Valentina found themselves transformed from ordinary teenagers into something approaching folk heroes. Not that they handled fame with any more seriousness than they'd handled their impending doom. So, Hazel said, at the welcome home ceremony, addressing a crowd of colonists who kept looking at them like they'd grown extra heads. The moral of the story is, when aliens try to make you fight each other for entertainment, just don't. That's your takeaway? Someone called from the crowd. That's my takeaway, she confirmed. Also, never underestimate the power of a really good cookie recipe to bridge cultural differences. Years later, when historians tried to pinpoint the moment the galaxy's moral compass shifted away from blood sport entertainment, they would point to those 3 human children sitting in an arena, refusing to become the monsters their captors expected them to be. But if you asked Hazel, Noah, and Valentina about it, they'd probably just shrug and say they did what anyone would do. They chose their friends over their fear, their principles over their survival, and their humanity over everything else. Which, when you think about it, is exactly the kind of thing that makes humanity worth celebrating in the first place. The galaxy, as it turned out, had just been waiting for someone to remind them.